What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Travis. Of course, this is TWA Motorsports, and today we're going to continue our progress on getting the red truck back on the road. So in the last video, we got several things under the hood, right? Including the intake, the motor's back in, a lot of the wiring is hooked back up. Now we still got a lot to go, but my next step is I really want to get the trans in, and I'm not going to put it in after scrubbing all the things that I scrubbed down. I'm not going to put it in with this looking like it is. So what I planned on doing is I'm going to set you guys up. We're going to see if we can clear some of this nastiness off. Now I'm not going to polish it or anything, but I do want to get it way cleaner than what it is. So what I think we'll start with is I'm going to go grab a couple rubber plugs, one for where the trans line goes in, like these two guys here, and then the dipstick tube. So I'm going to go grab a couple plugs just to keep, you know, some of this dirt that I'm going to be knocking around out of the transmission itself. But then we're just going to get some cleaner and we're going to go to town. So my goal for today, guys, is to not only get the transmission clean, obviously, and I'm going to time lapse that for you, but I want to get the trans back in, and I want to get the new tail shaft on. Remember, this tail shaft is the bushing's all messed up, so we don't have to worry about cleaning this section because we will be replacing it. But I want to get the trans in, and I want to get my drive shaft lined up to make sure that the length is right. Once we get that done, I'm hoping while I'm getting the drive shaft worked on, so basically after we get the trans in, we get the drive shaft in, make sure it's going to work, then I can take it up and have a new drive shaft made, because I'm pretty sure the one I have is not going to work. And if it does work, I'm still putting a new slip yoke on it, because I'll show you side by side when we get to that, the old slip yoke. But I want to see if we can get that done, and while it's at the shop getting put together and balanced, then maybe we can, you know, go ahead with some other stuff that I had planned. So that's the goal for today. We'll see how far we get, but let's set you guys up and see if we can clean some of this nastiness off. guys, at this point, I'd say we're finished. It's not perfect. And could I make it better? Probably. I mean, I've spent probably, I don't know, an hour now on this, maybe a little longer, just starting and stopping, doing kind of whatever. But yeah, it looks way better than what it did. I just wanted to get a big chunk of the oil off, you know, like, check this out. How much better it looks on that side too. But at this point, we're gonna go grab this stuff to take the rear tail shaft off, because remember, we gotta replace that. And then we'll probably do a little more cleaning once we get it out of place. Let's start by taking the 215s out that hold the actual trans mount in place. Golly, that thing's terrible. So we got a new one of those, obviously. But, holy cow, guys. What a mess. And then these are 15 as well. So let's take these all out. They shouldn't be real tight. And I want to show you guys why we had to go with a special slip yoke. Now there's probably, it's pretty snug. Okay, there is an O-ring. I don't think the new one came with an O-ring, so we may have to source another one. Or we may be able to reuse that one, just depends. Okay, so what's happening now? Actually, I'm gonna wipe my hands off. I'm gonna go grab the two yokes that I have and show you guys exactly what's going on. Now that we've got the tail shaft off, I wanted to show you. So this is a normal slip yoke. You can see that it's not counterboard at all. So what happens is this guy slides on here and then it stops because it can't go any further up. Okay? And what the guy did before is he counterboard some of it, but it only had like an inch of engagement. And I'm gonna bring that drive shaft over here so you can see it, but look at this one. See how it's counterboard? So now what we can do is we can slide this one all the way up. You see that? Instead of it stopping, we still have tons of engagement. So what we would want is we want it to come up all the way in as far as we can get it, and then come back like about an inch to 3/4 of an inch. That way, as you're driving down the road, you have some slip, right? So this one, while it's gonna work fine on a non-bolt version, like my other two that I have, like the one that's gonna go in my green truck and the one that's gonna go in my Trans Am, this one used to have like a metal cup here. And it's because the yoke is normally bolted on. There's a bolt hole in the end. Now, just because there's a bolt hole in the end does not mean necessarily that it had that. But this one slides on. We do need to take the O-ring off. When I ordered this, the guy said, make sure that you take the O-ring off. So I am gonna take his advice, even though the O-ring honestly is not causing any issues. I am gonna take it off because that's what he told me to do. And it's not creating any kind of seal anyway. It's not even touching. So anyway, I wanna go grab the other drive shaft so you can see how poorly it was put together. So I've got the old drive shaft here, and look at the cut on it, guys. You see that? And look how short it is. Look at the difference of engagement because it's not counterboard. And this thing, like you guys saw when I took it out, was completely jammed in there. I had to let the transmission down, and so it was bottoming out and absolutely destroying that rear bearing. So this is not the way to do things, guys. If you don't know what you're doing, look it up or find a way to do it the correct way. This is the right slip yoke if you've got a bolt-on style. And like I said, normally there's a metal cup that we would remove and then that O-ring. But now that we've got that, let's see if we can I'm gonna clean this area up here and we'll get the new piece in place. Hopefully we don't have any issues with the new tail shaft piece going in. There is a bearing in the end of it that's completely worn out. And then of course there's a seal on the back as well that's, you know, completely worn out as well. So either way, let's go grab the new one and see if we can get it in place. So similar to what I do on any kind of gasket material, and good news guys, the new tail shaft piece did come with a new O-ring. So I'm just gonna clean this surface off and then I'm gonna lightly scrape it just to make sure we get a good seat on the new one. And I'll probably go around this a couple times, and then I'm gonna grab my pick and we will grab this piece of rubber off of there. This could have been avoided with a little bit of research, but that's how it goes sometimes, guys. And this is the older version of the 4L80 also. You can tell by the way the lines are beside each other. So it's not the newest version. The other two that I have for in here, the one for the green truck and the one for the Trans Am, are both a newer version that have the LS bolt pattern. So it has a bolt at the 12 o'clock position, and this one does not. That's another way you can tell. And then their lines are further apart on the newer style. So I'd say that's good. Let's go get a pick and we'll pull this rubber seal off here. I'm just using the same pick that I used to get just about everything else out. Let's roll this thing off of here. And then I'm going to clean up the bolts off camera, and then we'll grab the new one and get it in place. This only goes on one way because obviously you have the mount that goes on the bottom. You can see the oil valley here lines up, and if you were pressing a bearing in, you need to make sure of that because there is a hole in the bearing to oil that. So either way, we just need to get this thing on here and we will snug it back down. I'm going to see if I can find some torque specs for it, because honestly guys, this is the first time I've replaced one of these and I don't know what the torque spec is. I have a feeling it's like in the 30s maybe. I don't know. This thing's pretty tinny, so it may be less than that, but we'll see if we can figure it out. I'm sure that I got a book that has a bunch of GM torque specs. I think it'll probably have that in there. If not, we'll hope. Golly, they don't thread in there real great. Oh, maybe they're better than I thought. This is why I didn't clean that back section, as I said. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab a ratchet and snug them down while I'm looking for the torque specs. So the only thing I could find showed 26 foot-pounds. So we're going to go kind of in a crosshatch pattern. And I will tell you, whatever they painted this with sucks. It's just not great. Seems like it's like flaking off if you touch it. Well, at this point, guys, we're pretty much ready to go back in the truck. I'm gonna go ahead and the little clips that go up here, so these guys right here, I think I've got one of them. I'm gonna have to hunt for the other. These things always fly off. These little clips, I'm gonna go ahead and put those in place. And just because, man, are they easier here than once you get the trans up in place, and they just snap on, and then you can snap your line into it. So other than that, we're ready to roll this thing back under the truck. I'm gonna keep the stock converter in it, no changes there, and we're ready to put this thing back in the truck. I do need to get the dipstick tube up kind of in place, and then we'll kind of see. It does have a spot to mount it. I don't know if it's gonna mount to the, generally they mount to like one of the transmission bolts here. So I'm gonna clean up the transmission bolts while I've got those out. But then the next thing you're gonna see is this under the truck. There actually is one more thing I wanna put on, and that's the trans mount. We need to put it in place. You see how it's shaped there? This longer piece that goes a little bit different of an angle, that goes towards the front. At least that's the way it's supposed to go. We'll see once we get the mount up in there, you know, the aftermarket mount that it had. But these get torqued to 18 foot-pounds. So we're gonna go ahead and just put that in so we don't have to struggle with trying to do it while it's in the truck. So we'll torque these down to 18 and then we'll be ready to go up in the truck. We're under the truck, and obviously we need to put the flywheel back in place, or the flex plate, whatever you want to call it, before we go back together. So this guy, pretty self-explanatory. The spacer on this is one from a truck, and it needs to go back in place here. And it does have a certain direction that it goes, and you can really tell by the wear pattern where the bolts were. But we're gonna put these in, and then chances are, guys, we're probably gonna have to put our flywheel locking tool back in place to torque these down. I'm gonna run them down with the impact, but the torque specs on these are 74 foot-pounds. So if you guys are wondering. So I'm gonna cinch these down, then torque them. I'll probably go around them a couple times to get it to 74. But I am gonna go ahead and put that locking tool in, because I just think that when we start to torque, it's gonna spin the motor over. You notice, but yeah, no such luck. So we'll get this in place again, which, look, we're gonna have to have it in there anyway. For the crank bolt. So we'll just go ahead and put it in here. And we can leave it in while we put the trans in. I couldn't imagine trying to do this stuff without these specialty tools. It would just make life suck. Now we should be able to get 74 on these. I'm alternating back and forth. All right, let's move on. One thing you guys may notice is that those bolts are different than what we started with a minute ago. And so when I was torquing those down, they started to strip. And that's because it had the wrong size flywheel bolts in it. And so just another piece of this puzzle that was not done correctly during this swap. So luckily I had the stock ones off a truck because they are a little bit longer. In fact, I'll show you here side by side. This is an F body one right here. This is what size this one was. And the truck one is about the size of the one on the right. This is just not the right size thread or thread pitch. So luckily I caught that and didn't ruin the end of the crank. So like I said, just another thing. Anyway, let's go back over to the trans, because I think there's two other things that I want to do before I get it up in place. But at this point, we're ready to roll it over here. But I do want to show you these two things because they are important to me. It's a little bit easier to do while we are messing with the trans down here on the ground. So I showed you earlier, we put the clips in here because that's harder to fight when it's up in the truck. But the other thing is I got a new gasket for this guy. So we're gonna go ahead and push it into place. And now we are ready to go up into the truck with the transmission. That's pretty much all I wanted to do, but I did want to show you guys that. The other thing is off camera, I put this on. This is not the original setting here on the ground. This was, I'm not really sure what they sourced this trans from. So if they sourced it from something that was different, but the way this hooks up, this is the direction this needs to go. So this cutout, as you can see, was on the other side like this. And that's just not the way it's supposed to be. So I had another one laying around. Hopefully your trans comes with it. I've never seen one like the one on the ground down there. So either way, let's slide this thing over and see if we can hoist it up into place. Now we do need to thread our dipstick tube up top, and we're just gonna kind of push it through kind of in this area, like right up there by the fuel rail. You can see at the very top. That's the direction I think it needs to go, but we'll get it over here, get it in place, and let's start putting this trans in. Let's hoist this thing up in there. You can see I got my dipstick tube kind of in place. We're gonna have to monkey with it as we go up. We want to try to line it up as we're going in. And what sucks is normally they bolt to the head, but this one bolts to the outside of a transmission bolt. So kind of makes it a pain in the butt. But we'll get it. Can you believe I did this for years on the ground? Holy smokes. All right, I'm gonna go make sure our dipstick tube's somewhat lining up. Oh, don't fall out. Okay. I'd say that's kind of lining up. Need to keep going. Other than the dipstick, really guys, not a whole lot else you need to be watching for. All the wires are somewhat out of the way. But if you get too far down and don't get the or too far up and don't get the dipstick where it needs to go, you will fight and fight and fight. Looky there. Just about got it. The dipstick is all the way in. So you can see, well, you probably can't see, but it lines up with one of the transmission bolts. It's just not a great design. But either way, almost there. We're there. So now it's going to be about next to impossible to show you, but I'm going to go ahead and put at least a couple trans bolts in there, and that'll give me a lot more room to work with. Maybe I can move some stuff out of the way, but either way, I'll show you once I get a couple trans bolts in. It's on the dowels at this point. So we got it in there. I'm gonna go ahead and see if we can get this out of the way. And hopefully this thing doesn't fall on the ground. It's gonna fall quite a bit. Holy cow. Yeah, that's a little more than I wanted it to fall. to be real honest with you. But I'm gonna go ahead and get this top bolt in. There's another bolt that goes up top here, and I want to get it in place because it holds the fuel line. So I want to do that, and so hopefully I can get that in there. I'm gonna have to use my little screw jack to move this thing up a little bit so we can do that, but that's our next step, hopefully. So you can see I've got all the bolts in, and I went ahead and torqued them to 37 foot-pounds. Okay, so I've got 5. Remember, we only had 4 to begin with. Now I have a 5th one, and that's all you can put in if you have this style trans, because it doesn't have that 12 o'clock position up top. So I do have all those in. The other thing I did was I went ahead and put my fuel line. There's a nut, because the way these bolts are designed, you see that bolt there? I put a nut on the end to put my fuel line in place, and I went ahead and put my wire loom in that holder up top there. So now we just need to go through and plug in all our connections. Pretty simple, guys. The newest one that we added to the harness, remember, on the ground, that one goes in the front. And then we need to put the side piece on. I'll try to show you guys that when I'm doing it. And then of course we need to take the caps off our trans lines and get them in place. But once we do all that, we can lift this thing up. You can see I put my jack back under it just to support it a little bit. We can lift it back up and get it in place, but I'll try to show you guys. I'll cut in here and there and show you the connections, but it's pretty plug and play at this point. We've got everything hooked up. You can see sorry, I'm hitting the mic on stuff. This one back here goes to the rear O2. There's one up top here. You see the one that's not plugged in there. That goes to the front O2. And then we have this back on. Now, this was completely screwed up before. Let's talk about what was going on. So first off, this was backwards. And because this was backwards, this was all zip tied up. So that's what I was talking about. So what I did, I went ahead and pushed that through, and you can see the little clip there that maintains that in its spot. And besides that, we used 2 13s. It only had one of these, so I got another one. So we've got a 13 there and the 13 here, bolting this to the side of the transmission, and then a 15 with the arm, and the little piece that sticks off the arm points to the inside, and that gives us the correct way to hook things up. So at this point, guys, we've got everything hooked up that we want on the transmission, aside from the trans lines, and literally all I have to do is just, like I said, take the cap off and push those into place. But because that's all we have left, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and well, plug the trans lines in, and then I'm going to lift this thing up and get the cross member in place down there. You can see it. I cleaned it up the other night. So let's get this thing lifted up and see if we can get it at least mounted, because I want to set up, like I said, the drive shaft and make sure that we're all good there, because I'm going to have the drive shaft rebalanced to make sure everything's good. But let's keep plugging away. So you can see we've got this started. All I did was lift this up, guys. I should have showed it on camera, but got the new mount. Got a slip yoke in there, got at least 2 bolts, one on each side. I'm gonna go ahead and put the other ones in there, because at this point, we really don't need this down anymore. So let's do that. Let's put these other 2 bolts in. And then we could probably even torque it down, to be real honest with you. We need to lift it up a little bit, it looks like. I'm gonna go ahead and run these bolts down. We'll get some torque specs and see kind of what we got. We're gonna torque these here, the 4 to 43 foot-pounds, and then the center bolt that you guys see right here, that's gonna go to 18. So we're gonna start with these, go to 43, and then we'll back up and do 18 on this guy. Now I'm just gonna put my drive shaft up in here, make sure that all I need to do is just have this in put on. I think that's probably gonna be the case, because this one slides in so much further. But we're gonna put it back in the back, in the rear end, and then we'll bring it up here and we'll take a look and see how much we need to either lop off of it or add to it. So take a look at what we got. This is too long, guys. There's no way that's going to work. It's just not. So what we need to do, first of all, I'm gonna move this to where we've got it kind of straight up and down. Give me a little bit better thing to play with. So what we're gonna do is, we know that this is too short. So, or I'm sorry, too long. We need to measure. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna push this all the way in. So you see it's bottomed out, and then we're gonna pull it out 1 inch from where it's at. So what do we got here? 1 3/8. So we need to pull it out 3/4 to 1 inch. So we'll pull it out to here. And that is 1 inch right there. So that is technically where our new measurement needs to be taken. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna measure from the center of this hole to the center of the rear end. And that should give us a good idea of what our drive shaft should actually be. Now, this also needs to be measured at ride height. So as the suspension compresses and lets go, this thing will slide in and out, in and out. And I know that I've moved it since I'm gonna have to remeasure it. But I wanted to show you guys that, you know, this one was bottomed out, just pushing up against this and just wrecking that bearing in the end. So we're gonna go ahead, take this out. I've got a local driveline shop that'll fix this up, and we shouldn't have any issues. Now that we have the drive shaft measured out, I've got a new piece for this. Now I chose to go with ICT Billet, and the main reason, guys, is nobody makes a gasket that I'm in love with. The original one that had the gaskets that went around this, nobody makes, like even GM, they went to a newer style, and it looks like it's gonna leak, and I don't like it. So this one has, it's made out of a piece of billet, and then it has a rubber gasket, you can see in here, that goes inside there. And then I'm gonna torque this down to about 106 inch-pounds, and that should be good there. So we'll go ahead and put it in place. And then I'm gonna grab the closeouts that normally go here. Now, it's not as important on these because obviously this is open. They do make a panel to close this out if you wanna add that, and I probably should because this is so nasty looking. But I am gonna go ahead and put our plastic pieces on at least this side, because I still have to swing this around and get our torque converter bolts in place. So you can see I've got the plastic piece in. I just tighten that up by hand, just get it good and snug. And then the ICT piece, that looks really nice, guys. Of course, I'll list it in the description down below as well, but as well as all these other parts. But I think at this point, we may be close to setting it down and possibly sliding maybe the headers in place. So that may be our next move, since we've got everything down here for the most part addressed. So guys, it's been a couple days since I've actually been out here working on this, and the last thing I think I showed you was the ICT billet piece there and that plastic plate. And I said, I think I'm gonna go ahead and put the headers in. Well, yes and no. So this side's gonna be fine. Well, I came over here and looked, and you could see our trans lines, and so I don't think that's gonna work. And anyway, I would wanna put the torque converter bolts in, and I had to order some more, so I've got those now. But in the meantime, I also got my drive shaft. See it down there on the floor? So what I'm gonna do is I think I'll just start with the drive shaft since I'm back here and all the bolts are readily available. So let's get that thing slid up into place now that it's shortened. It's got that new slip yoke on it, got that new tail shaft in place. Everything looking real nice. So let's go grab it and see if we can get it in there. Things I did while I had it there was I had a new U-joint put on the rear as well. So what I'm hoping is we measured correctly and this thing goes in here. That's what I'm hoping. So we need to go all the way back, pull this little sleeve off, see if we can get this thing in place. That's good. And guess what? We measured right. That's actually perfect. Okay, so now we just need to go to the back. Since this is slid in here, we may have to put it in neutral and move this around to get it to line up. Not really sure. I may have to take that loose on the transmission so we can spin it and get it in the back. It's real close, but we'll go ahead and do that too. I actually didn't even have to put it in neutral, which is good because I didn't really want to climb up in the truck and I didn't want to unhook anything either. So let's get these strap bolts in. These are 11 millimeters, if you remember. And they torque down to 15 foot-pounds, so not a lot on them. And they're not very big, so you wouldn't want to put any more than 15 on them or they will snap off. It's crazy that just 15 millimeters holds this drive shaft that spins at, you know, 100 miles an hour. But that is the case. Now, if you do replace your U-joints, I had this thing balanced as well. But if you replace your U-joints, guys, make sure that if you get the new ones with grease Zerk fittings in them, go ahead and put grease in them. They do a really good job. The place I went, it's a local shop, and they put grease in them for you. They balance it. They even paint it. Now, it's not, look, it's just some Krylon, but still looks nice when they finish. All right, we'll get these torqued down and we'll move back to the front. So now what we need to do is we need to get our torque converter bolts in. And so hopefully you guys can see that. We've got a 24 on the crank, and I put the old bolt in there for now. I took my flywheel stop out and we rolled it around to where we have an opening there. And then what I did was you can spin the converter and move it to where the bolts line up from behind. And so you can see one of our pads line up there. And this actually takes 6 and it only had 3. So I'm gonna put 6 in it, because that's what it should take. It's using an actual flywheel off of a truck that accepts a 4L80. If you were using a 4L60 flywheel, which you'll see when we go to the green truck, we'll only use 3. But we'll also be using a converter that's spec'd for a flywheel that's made for a 4L60. So there's some clearance issues if you don't have that. This one has a spacer built in. So either way, we're gonna thread one in. And so how I like to do this is we're gonna thread one in and make sure that it's good. Then we're gonna roll to the next one, thread it in a little bit, and we're gonna keep doing that. We're gonna make it 1 or 2 cranks down as we spin it around. What happens is if you get all of them in kind of hand tight, and then you start to cinch down on one, it'll pull the other ones out and then it won't spin. And so you don't wanna do that. So just go around, it takes a little bit of time, and I'm not gonna really be able to show you much here on camera, but we'll get them in there, hand tight all the way around, and then we'll come back, maybe thread them in a couple turns, turn it, do the same thing to all 6, and like I said, you're gonna use some time here. Now that we got all our bolts in, and I didn't even tell you guys, I just bought some factory replacements. They're actually a Dorman part number, and I'll list them down below, but we need to torque all 6 of these things down, and it's tight quarters, let me tell you, but you can barely get a torque wrench in there, especially with, obviously your starter's got to be out of the way, but I haven't got the header in there yet. That's another reason why, other than the trans lines, I didn't want to do that first. But 32 foot-pounds is what the factory spec calls for. And let's go ahead and get those torqued down, and then we should be able to put our starter in place. Now, it does help if you have somebody to hold the flywheel while you're, or not the flywheel, but the crank while you're turning this, because it's going to want to move on you when you get to that 32 foot-pounds. But it can be done. You can use the block as kind of leverage. It doesn't give you as accurate of a torque spec. So if you have 2 people, it would be a good time to have somebody on the front to keep the motor from spinning around. Once we got those tight, let's go ahead and get the starter in place. Now remember, we have to hook up our trigger wire, which is an 8 millimeter. And we want to make sure that our trigger wire doesn't come in contact with the power wire. Otherwise, as soon as you hook the battery up, this thing is going to want to start on you. And that's bad. We don't want that. So we got an 8 here to snug this down. And then this is a 13, and there is a spot that it specifically sets in. There's a channel, and that's to keep that from getting into that trigger wire. So it's a little tight, I will tell you that, but just take your time. And remember, we messed with this wiring, so it may be a little difficult for you. Wanting to get it in that channel, and I can't find it because I don't have enough light. There it is. So now, see if I can do this without dropping it. As you can see, I cleaned the starter up off camera. It was completely coated in oil, just like everything else on this truck. But once we get that in, try to get it as far down as we can, and then we'll bring it back down and tighten it. There we go. And you don't want to get crazy tightening this, guys, because this is just plastic and you will snap this housing, especially if it's an older starter. So I don't even generally tighten it down with a ratchet, and if I do, I'm very, very careful about how I do it. So we're ready to swing it up in place and get the 213s lined up that hold it to the actual block. Before we put it up in there, shine your light up in there, make sure that the trigger wire that was the 8mm and that are not touching, and they're not. So now, actually we need to go get our little closeout. There's a little closeout panel I'm gonna put on first. We can just let that hang there for now. Just a little 10mm, and really it's not that imperative since we don't have a closeout panel here, but I am gonna go ahead and put it on since I have it. Okay, so I don't actually have one. Apparently this truck didn't have one. I guess I'm just so used to putting them on, but I actually got to thinking before I put this starter in, I need to go ahead and lock down that crank bolt in the front, because we're not gonna have access. I mean, this is gonna spin if I try to, torque down that crank bolt next. So what I'm gonna do is we'll go ahead and put our flywheel stop back in here. We're just gonna let this guy hang here for now. We're gonna set this truck back down on the ground, and then we will get the crank bolt tightened up. Then we can lift this thing back up and put the starter in. I knew I was forgetting something, and like I said, that closeout panel is not that imperative since we don't have any piece to the bottom of the transmission here. I wish we did, because that converter is hideous. I thought about painting it, but then I thought, well, I looked at aftermarket converters even, but I wanted it to drive stock, especially if my dad buys it. He's gonna want it to drive as stock as possible, and it actually drives really well with the stock converter. Okay, we got that in there. Let's drop this thing down and see if we can torque down that, that crank bolt. How we're gonna do this is we got the new crank bolt, or sorry, the old crank bolts in there, okay? We need to, obviously we already put it in with the installer. We need to take it down to 240 foot-pounds. So we're using the old crank bolt, remember? Crank it down to 240 foot-pounds. That's just to make sure that that thing's seated correctly. So once we do that, then we can take that old one out and put the new one in and torque it to 37. And then I'll show you the next step, because we got to take it 140 degrees past the 37. Now remember, our locking tool is in the flywheel, so that's important. Otherwise this is just going to turn. And I'll show you once we get the old one torqued, the new one torqued at 37, and I'm just using a stock GM bolt. I'll show you that actually in between. We'll torque it to 37, and then I'll show you how I'm going to, I don't have a torque wrench that measures degrees, so I'm going to use a breakover bar, and but I'll show you that here in just a second. Got that done, got the old one out. Here's the new one. Just like I said, another GM piece. And get it out of the bag. We're gonna thread it in and torque it to 37. Now comes the fun part. So we've got it torqued to 37. And so what I did was, you could see I put a mark on the very bottom. And that's how I'm gonna tell when I get to 140 degrees. So you have to remember that, directly up is 180. So we're not gonna make it there. We're gonna be just shy of that, right? So we need to get our breaker bar and probably some sort of cheater pipe. I've got it over here. It's actually an old handle off of a jack that I'm gonna use to crank that thing around to get it where I want it, and we're gonna call that good. So after a lot of grunting, that's as far as I could get it. Now, I've never had one back out. I know that's not quite 140, but like I said, I've never had an issue. So we're gonna jack this thing back up, get under it, and put the starter in, take that stop out for the last time. Back underneath, let's get this lock out of place, hopefully for the last time. And we just need to swing the starter up here, and the starter torques to 37 foot-pounds. Just like about everything else that goes on the block. And the cool thing about LS motors is there's really no shims or any weirdness with the starters. I know on some of your older stuff, you gotta worry about shimming it the correct way and whatnot. Not with the LS stuff. Get one started. This other one sometimes is a pain. Don't cross thread. Move it back and forth until it fits like it's supposed to. And that's going to be a close fit, guys, with the header, I have a feeling. There is no way those trans lines are going to be able to stay there. And I feel like I had this same issue on my green truck. So what we may end up having to do is cut those and make our own rubber lines. Not really sure yet. I don't even know if that little ear on the transmission is going to allow it to work either. I don't know. We'll just have to see. We may be taking this back out. I don't know. So I'm going to go ahead, torque this down to 37, and I think we'll move over and put the header in on the driver's side at least. Let's take a look at what I decided to go with as far as headers. No secret here, guys. I've used Speed Engineering several times. They make a great product for a reasonable price. Look, if I was building some super high-end, would I go with like a Cook's or an American Racing? I tend to lean more towards American Racing. I don't know why. That's what I used on my ZR1. But Speed Engineering, for the money, it just can't be beat. As far as the fitment, they seem to fit really well in everything I've ever used them in. So that's what I chose to go with. So we've got long tubes. These are 1 3/4. Now, if I was going to do a blower or something, you'd probably want to go to 1 7/8. That's, I think, the biggest they make. So it comes with everything here. Y pipe, of course, the headers, they do have a velocity spike, which is nice. You notice the ones that I used on the green truck didn't have that, which I was kind of surprised, but they were some cheapy eBay knockoffs, I believe. And of course, your clamps. And then it does come with gaskets. These, throw those away. Immediately throw those away. Don't use those. Buy GM gaskets. I'll list them down below. That is what you want to do. And then as far as header bolts, guys, I'm not going to deal with that broken off header bolts again. Whether I keep this truck, my dad buys it, or one of you guys buy it, there's just no sense in not replacing it with a good quality bolt. So ARP is what I'm going to be using. I will also list that down below. But I'm thinking I might be able to snake this thing up in there. I don't know if I have the reach in order to get maybe a bolt started or two. I'm not really sure, but we're gonna see if I can get them up in there. I want to thread them in from the bottom, so we'll just have to see. So I may have enough room to get a couple started. I don't know. I may be crazy. But you do need to make sure there's a manifold side and a down. And we need to make sure that that goes in the correct way, obviously. And your bolts have a washer on them also. We need to make sure that goes in the correct way also. I don't know. I think I'm going to drop the majority of these bolts. We'll see. Yeah, the bolts are already falling out. There goes one. When they fall in the collector like that, that's really a problem. So let's just try to put it up in there with one. Yeah, that's a tight fit. Woo-wee. Oh no, guys. I'm gonna take the gasket out. Just see if we can get the header in there to begin with. I'm trying to do too much at one time. It's like trying to put a puzzle together. There we go. So now we got it in there. I don't know, guys. I think we're gonna have to go up top to hook it up. I just don't have very much room to get the gasket in. The good news is I don't think it's gonna fall out, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a bungee cord across the bottom here to keep it up in place, and then we'll go up top and see if we can at least get it hooked up. Yeah, this is definitely a better way. So I've got it bungeed up, which, like I said, it's not gonna fall out. So now let's get the manifold gasket in there and start a couple bolts. Should be able to do that up here. Of course, I'm not gonna be able to show you guys much of that, but once I get it all the bolts lined up and in, then we'll come back and talk about torque specs. At this point, I've got all the bolts snug down by hand. I was just using a ratcheting wrench, and you want to start in the middle and work your way back or out. So the two middles, then the two next, then the ones on the farthest, the very back and the very front. Normally you would go through, torque these to 11 and then 18. But since they're ARP, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to torque to 18. If you're using stock ones, 11 and then 18. I don't know that it really matters. If you'd like to, you can go ahead and run these all at 11, starting from the middle, working your way out, and then go to 18. That's what we're going to finish up with. Got all those to 18. Now, here's what I'm thinking. Instead of lifting this thing back up and down, let's go ahead and we'll situate all our wires here. We're going to go ahead and grab the plugs. In fact, I'm going to do that first. I'm going to go grab the spark plugs. We're going to go ahead and put those in. Get them gapped. They should be gapped out of the box, but if they're not, we'll go ahead and get those in. But I want to tie up all this junk over here that we had, see if we can get it back to where it needs to go, and then we can move on to the other side. Now for spark plugs, we're using just some NGK TR55s, and I'm gapping them to 60 thousandths, just like the truck would be from the factory. And they're pretty close to that. I'm also gonna go grab some anti-seize to put on the threads, just because we're going into aluminum. You don't wanna risk like stripping them out. I'm not using a ton of anti-seize, just barely getting the threads wet. Same thing here, guys, like we did on the header bolts. If it doesn't feel like it's going in correctly, stop. Don't cross thread it. There is a torque spec on these. I never torque them. I literally just go by feel, get them snug, and we call that good. So I put them in by hand. I've got a small extension here. You can see that just helps me get a little more grip. But I'm just gonna snug them down, and then we'll move on. Now that I got the spark plugs in, I'm gonna go ahead and move the drive shaft back into, or the steering shaft back into place, and get the bolt in it. Remember, we took it out just to have a little more access. Luckily, this was built pretty good, where you have some decent access. I mean, the plugs, they're not too bad for what they are. I'm gonna have to look up a torque spec on that, because I have no idea what the steering shaft torques to. So we'll look that up, and then we'll start moving some wire at that point. So 35 foot-pounds is what it calls for on the upper bolt, 37 on the bottom one if you ever got to take it loose. So let's get it torqued down, and then onto the wires. Let's see we can fix this mess of wires here. So we need to release this guy. Just pushing these little tabs. We need to get this over here. So it comes in one side, this is still over there. Comes in one side and goes out the other. Got this big clamp here that it goes in. Need to fish all this stuff through. This will more than likely be somewhat time consuming. We need to get the, I believe it's a 7. And go ahead and put that back in. And then I'm gonna go grab that right now, because the rest of this stuff goes through here also. Let's try to tuck it around. Always try to do too much at one time, I feel like. Always trying to make stuff look nice, and it's not ready to look nice yet, you know? So let's go get the 8 first, or the 7, I don't remember. Get that snug, and then we'll plug these other wires in. And it's a 7. As you tighten this, it's going to draw up into the fuse panel. So any of you LS swappers out there that are going from a V6 to a V8, this is really the only plugs you're going to have to worry about if you get the factory harness. And you want to get this snug but not over tight. You don't want to break it, it's just plastic. So now that we got that, we can worry about these plugs, and they're color coded. So we got a blue going to a blue down here. Got that one. Got a black to a black. And then you're gonna see one in here that has nothing to do with anything. These guys right here, leave those unplugged. I went back and forth, guys, forever on my green truck. But that's it. We only unplugged 3 things. Let's go ahead and set this thing back in here. Trying to route all your wires out this side and then out the sides here. Once we have that snap back in place, I did go ahead and put this back in there. You can see it's clipped. And this wiring runs down the corner here. So let's go ahead and hook this guy up. It's probably an 8. Since I got a 7 on here. Ah, it's a 7. This is the power from the battery to the fuse block. And I actually think, guys, this goes down this other side here. It goes down here. There we go. Because there's a thing that holds it here, a clip. If you can get it in there. We may be able to once we get the computer hooked up. So I'm going to go ahead and do that next. Go ahead and hook the ECM or the PCM or whatever you want to call it up. Blue in the front. It only wants to go one way. Those should be 7s also. Kind of same situation, they'll start to draw up as you snug them down. And don't over tighten. Try to get them started square. And they should be on there. All right. we've made this look better already. Yeah. All right, so if you can, you know, you can try to sneak this into this clip. Oh, I got it. There we go. So we're all finished with the wiring side, other than obviously going this direction, but I think it's looking pretty nice. Looks original. Now, I don't know, I don't think I have the cover clean yet that goes over this, so I need to clean that, and then we can, technically we could go ahead and put it back on, but let's move on to, I think I want to go ahead and put the coil pack on this side before I hook any of these wires up. That'll just give me a little more room to mess with. So let's go grab our coil packs and get them in place. So as far as which coil pack goes where, the easiest way to tell is this guy on this side has this to hold that big wire pack right there. And we're just using the stock bolts to put it back in place. Now remember, when I took this apart, we found out that they skimped on putting it back together at some point. So there was only 4, normally there's 5, and 4 will hold it. So it won't hurt anything. We'll go ahead and put these 10s in. And I don't torque these either, guys. These are, just snug them down by hand with a 10mm, just a small 10. And then once we obviously get that tightened down, we can put this in our loom, or our loom in that, and hook up our injectors. And then there is a, looks like a wire holder in the back to kind of keep the injector wiring kind of out of place. And then of course we need to plug in our coil pack here. So we'll probably do that next. I'm gonna take this 10 loose. You know, I originally put it up there thinking that I was doing something good, but it's kind of in the way there. It needs to go back behind everything. Let's get it out of the way for now. And we'll tighten these 10s up. And then we're just gonna plug the injectors back in and that main coil pack harness. Let's catch you up on some of the stuff that I did. All right, so we got obviously all the injectors hooked up, as you can see here. We got the coil pack harness here hooked up right there. I put the fuel line retainers on. They're just little metal clips. I hooked up the knock sensor. You can see this blue plug back here. I hooked it up and it has a clip that holds it onto the top of the intake there. I moved our ground. I hooked up our coolant temp sensor down here right on the head. I hooked up all of the throttle body, so the wires that go to the throttle body out of this harness. I hooked up our evap up top. I even went down, so this wire right here that you see, I zip tied it to this line, ran it all the way down, and that plugs in to our new cam position sensor. So I went back behind this right here, made sure it's not gonna touch any wires and or any of the belts and get in the way. And I've got it hooked up down there. So no issues there. I zip tied it, like I said, all the way down that battery line and that negative line. So we should be good.